Harbor Management Commission Plan Update Committee meeting, January 14th, 2022. Here in the room with me are Jack Hirschler and Jeff Stedman. On the phone we have, who's on the phone?
Brian LeClaire.
Brian LeClaire, our Harbor Master.
Don Hyman.
Don Hyman, welcome.
Thank you.
Cheryl Beacock or Mary Von Conta? Okay, maybe Cheryl or Mary will join us. I believe that Doug is not available. This is, Don, you're on the phone, which is, you're the new person here. And the introductions, which is the first item on our agenda, was to introduce you to the other commissioners. And just briefly, would you, I know you have a public relations background, would you just give us a little, since we're going to be in the public relations business pretty shortly, would you give us just a, quick summary of some of the things you've done or how you think you could help us, or,
Sure. Basically, I'm kind of a hack writer and storyteller. My whole career has been around telling stories, first as a journalist for more than a decade with the Associated Press, and then later using those same skills to make more money and live a better life in Fairfield as a public relations person, working as a consultant in the public relations space, mostly with the pharmaceutical industry and the hospital industry, and then later joining the corporate ranks as a director of communication for Bayer Corporation. And then after a decade with Bayer and some political upheaval and the usual things, I went back to consulting, and I spent about 15 years working for Edelman, again in kind of corporate communications and issues management and kind of public affairs, public policy matters for corporations, helping them communicate their positions, helping them when they have problems. Things like that. Persuasion was basically, but persuasion is usually what was involved, trying to persuade a point of view, and to connect with publics. And then I retired from that in 2014, and I've been doing the same thing for free for different volunteer groups, and now with the Harbor Management Commission.
Well, we're thrilled. We're thrilled to have you with us because our public relations work is really just at the beginning. We will have to take our updated plan before a public meeting and or hearing or plural events. We will have to take our updated plan to the RTM. And so as part of that effort, we, about a year ago, I guess, maybe a year and a half ago, decided that we, in the person of Jeff Stedman, have a tremendous amount of information and knowledge about the history of the harbor, how the harbor works, the intricacies and the complexities of the regulatory scheme that governs life in the harbor, that we need to communicate to the folks who spend time there and value the harbor. And so we have decided, though not acted on, that we need to post on our website and reach out to the public with some of this information, so that when we begin our public hearings and our visits to the RTM, that we're not starting from from zero. And to that end, we did a survey last summer, and in that survey we discovered that indeed the public wanted to hear from us. So that is one of the reasons why we have
I hear the echo.
We have included the dredging. I hear the echo too.
Oh, maybe these things?
Could be those. We've just.
Turn that off. Yeah, that turned off everybody. It's turned off everybody? Yes, yeah, I'll turn off.
We're trying to, can you hear me? Can anyone hear me? Oh, good. Oh.
This is Brian. I hear you, and I'm not hearing any echo for what it's
I
worth.
think that these things may be giving feedback. They were too close together.
We had some, the portable speakers that we think were creating the echo, which we've moved around. But in any event, so we have this wonderful presentation that Jeff has put together on the dredging, and I guess I'm jumping ahead to item 2 on the agenda. So let me stop there because I'd like to go over the public information presentations. But to go back to our agenda, the Harbor Management Plan review, we have updated updated in the sense that we've talked about chapters 2, 4, and all of 6, which leaves us pretty much just chapter 5 to review. Right? That's where we stand. And Don and Brian, for your information, when I say we've updated, we as a committee reviewed the current chapters and made suggestions. Jeff will do the hard work. We made suggestions about things that we thought that were missing, language and events that were not included in the original 1995 version that we now think should be included. So we're pretty much done with updating the plan, but for Chapter 5. Jeff?
Yeah, and another purpose of the presentations that we put together, as Kim has mentioned, the presentation today that we're going to talk about has to do with the history of the navigation improvements in Southport. And we have another presentation that we prepared in the course of our work to update the plan, which is more general in nature and deals with all of the facets of managing Southport Harbor. And then our third presentation has to do with presenting the results of the survey that we did. And part of the survey had to do with public outreach as well, to inform people of what the commission is doing. And in addition to being of benefit to the people who use the harbor, these presentations are also intended to be of benefit and to educate state and federal officials that have a role in approving the harbor management plan and approving work in the harbor. And those officials, the number of DEP personnel are retiring this spring. So the institutional knowledge on the federal government and the state of Connecticut, going back to the harbor management plan beginning in Southport, has to be updated from time to time. And I think it's fair to say that perhaps the most significant part of updating the harbor management plan includes our plan for how to maintain the harbor through dredging. And the issue that's probably been the most difficult issue for us to grapple with since the 1980s is maintaining the navigation channel in the Mount Harbor on the west side of the jetty. And going back many years, there were conflicts with the DEP that I don't know if that echo is bothering other people or not, but I'll keep talking. When the plan was first approved it was our understanding, and it served to be true, that if we could solve the regulatory issues with Southport Harbor that were of concern and were involved the U.S. Attorney and the State of Connecticut and the Corps of Engineers, if we could resolve those issues with the Harbor Management Plan, then the Corps of Engineers would consider dredging Southport Harbor. And that's what happened. And we were able at that time to obtain an allocation of what's called earmarked federal funds for maintenance dredging of the harbor, the entire harbor. The issue, though, this is all sort of introductory stuff, why we're talking about this today. The issue that we couldn't resolve is maintaining and restoring the 100-foot width of the channel at the mouth of the harbor because of the encroaching sandbar and because of the establishment on the sandbar of plants that are identified as threatened in the state of Connecticut and couldn't be touched. And then subsequently the nesting of an endangered bird species, which is the piping plover. So even though there were enough funds allocated by the federal government to restore the 100 width, we're not able to get permission from the state of Connecticut to do that because of the potential impact on the grasses. And that has been a continuing problem. Now we're working with the Corps, and again, this is probably the most significant thing that we can include in the plan update. How the channel is to be maintained, and that it will be maintained to the 100 feet, with an agreement with the DEEP and the Corps of Engineers. So we're working with the Corps. We have been to come up with a dredging plan, and that would involve using the Corps' own hydraulic dredge, which essentially sucks up sand and then it would disperse it a little bit offshore. And we're working on those plans now. But to finalize the plan, questions have come up about ownership and the history of the navigation improvements in Southport, and that's why we put together this presentation. So I don't know, I'm talking a whole lot. I wish everybody was in the room, but should we go through some slides?
I'm wondering if we make let these guys talk a bit. Let's see if we can excuse them and see if that stops the echo.
So, can folks hear?
I can
Yes,
hear
Madam Chairman, it's Brian. We can hear everything fine.
So you're not hearing the echo?
We are not.
I'm hearing an echo. I can live with it, but it is. I hear everything twice.
Yeah, that's not good, is it?
That's not. But I'm wondering if we turn these off, these remotes. I think everybody is everybody off?
My daughter says if everyone goes on mute except for the speaker, then the echo goes away.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to put then on.
Well, no, everybody listening goes on.
Can everybody?
Yes, Brian LeClaire. I can mute. I'll mute myself from here.
Okay.
I just wanted to add first, though. I just wanted to, for the record, thank Jeff for this presentation we've received. Not only is it well written, it is visually wonderful to the pictures that really explain everything. I think he did a great job on it. I'm very impressed with it, and thank you. That was a lot of work, I know, creating this, but it is very good. So thank you, and I'll mute myself.
Thank you for saying that.
I can just follow up on that if you hear me. I would agree. It's visually rich. I learned a tremendous amount, scrupulously researched history that really, if you're a harbor lover, as all of us are, otherwise why would we be here? It's very satisfying and important reading. I've shared it with people in my family because I think it's so interesting. But I also have to say, as a communicator and as a new person on the block, I did have some questions and concerns, and when it's appropriate, I'd be happy to share those with you.
Do you want to?
Do you want to go ahead, Don?
Oh, okay. I'm going to talk about the dredging history that was most recently shared by Kim. I'm aware that you're working on another revised plan, and I'm also now aware that there is a third possible presentation on the survey, and I'm familiar with that survey as well. And the questions I have are questions that I would ask of any, when I'm looking at any document that has to persuade people or inform people, and that is, who are the target audiences? And what do we want them to do after they have received this presentation? Have we anticipated their questions in the presentation? Do they come away understanding what they're expected to decide, what the issues are, things like that. I think this meets the goal of sharing the history of our harbor beautifully. But I don't know what the ask is, if I could use that phrase, that we're making of the different town officials and state officials that we're going to present to. Nor do I know who is presenting or when, nor do I know what the expectation of a presentation is, because some of these are pretty long and I don't know what kind of comfort level the different audiences have for this kind of information. My experience generally is that people like compression, that less is more. Even when you're talking about something as wonderful and lustrous as our harbor and its history. But I do have questions, as I say, on what we want people to do, what the point of this is after they read it. The presentations that I'm used to looking at, where we're trying to persuade people, have a clear sense of what the situation analysis is right up front. What are the issues that we face, the goals and the objectives of the project, a tactical plan, budget considerations, those kinds of things. In the dredging document, we don't really get to any kind of discussion of what happens next until page 28, when there's a good, concise discussion of what the commission is doing now, what we're trying to do now. I wonder if, as one suggestion, we might want to think about having something at the very beginning of any presentation on dredging that puts this into a context on what's at stake now, why we're doing this, why are we talking about this before we get into the history. I think we need to make clear why it's important, what is the important next step that we would like people to consider taking. I'll stop there.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I can respond. And those are all good comments, but I think that's jumping ahead a bit, because first of all, the purpose of the larger presentation, Don, was in part to educate new members of the Harbor Commission and to provide some information to people who might respond to the survey, so that it was on the website when the survey was posted. But the history presentation is not for the general public now, the way we put it, because you're right, it doesn't say what we're going to do next or what the outcome is. It was put together principally for the Corps of Engineers and for the Commission and for the state of Connecticut, because of the questions that were raised concerning ownership of the lands that would be affected by the dredging project. So we assembled the historical information that the Corps of Engineers was asking for in order for them to start to make a decision about ownership, including of the sandbar that would be dredged. So this, I don't view this as a presentation yet for the public to explain what we've accomplished and what we hope to accomplish. but rather in response to specific information requests by the Corps of Engineers, and we just tried to put it in a nice format. So I can go through this if you wish, but all your points are well taken. At some point, and I also say that the general presentation was also quite helpful to the RTM when we were presenting a request to amend the town code having to do with some of the Harbor Commission's authorities. And I think the RTM appreciated just being able to look at that presentation at their leisure, many of whom didn't even know that there was a harbor management plan. But the bigger issue for all of these things, not the history one of the navigation project, but is so that we, however this is best presented in the future for the public, is so that there's an understanding of the history that went through to establish the harbor management plan, and we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Because what we've learned, and you, of course, you know this too, is I remember a friend of mine at the Corps of Engineers told me that after about 25 or 30 years, the issues that they thought they had solved come back again, because the people are gone that solved them, and conditions change. So we don't want a repeat of the issues that led to the harbor plan 30 plus years ago. So that's a long-winded response to your thoughtful comments. But the history one is not for the public right now. I mean, it could be, but it was prepared for the Corps of Engineers and for the Commission, and also for the Country Club of Fairfield, because the Country Club of Fairfield has to be a partner in all of this, and actually we'll be having a smaller meeting with representatives of the Country Club, because their understanding of the project and of their supporting role for access through their property is most important. So anyway, I wish everybody was here so I didn't have to.
This is Jack. The only thing I would add is that the issues that Don is raising are interconnected with our goal here to work with the regulatory agencies that we're going to need to work with to get this dredging accomplished, because the reality is also that the community, people who rely on this channel to move boats in and out of the harbor, I think are increasingly feeling frustrated about the pace of our ability to accomplish the work. And so there is a PR emerging challenge for us as a commission that can use some of this content together with setting the table for why the problems are maybe more complicated than people might think, and here are the steps that we're taking as a commission and help manage people's expectations around the process and the timeline, that I think could use some of this content that you've created already in a different purpose to accomplish that goal. And I think we have to do both at the same time, because we're starting to see things in social media around the community that are expressing growing concerns about the sand filling the channel to a point where boats are sometimes running aground on their way in and out.
Yeah.
So I think all of them are going. It's the same content or parts of the same content that could be repurposed as part of the explanation to people about why this is a little bit more complicated than they might think for us to do.
And if I can add one thing to that, I'm looking at right at the moment in front of me is the presentation, Southport Harbor Historic Navigation Project on the Connecticut Coast, a presentation by Fairfield Harbor Management Commission, December 2021. This is the one that you were saying is mostly for educating people like myself on the commission. Thank you. It does that perfectly. And others in the Army Corps of Engineers that need this kind of background. My suggestion would be to add a one-page collection of bullets at the very beginning of it that says, the headline is something like, questions we're concerned with now. And you enumerate whatever, 4 or 5 key kind of overarching questions that we're dealing with, so that people have a context as to why we're presenting this. And they have a general sense of what has to be resolved. And they have as they go through the history, they have a sense of why certain things are important. And then at the end of this presentation, we should have another page of bullets that answers them in a very, very concise top-line manner, so that people come away with it knowing, that we've not only have the history, but we've thought about this, and we're going forward with an informed process. Those are my suggestions.
I think those are good, except the end. We don't have the answers to some of the questions yet, Don. But I understand what you're getting at.
So is it as effective, do you think, if we just said at the end, we're working on the answers to these, the questions that we don't have the answers to, we're working on these? I mean,
I'd like to have.
Yes, that could be something like that, or these are the to repeat, these are the issues we're working on now. So people understand, and you bullet it out at the front end of it and at the back end of it, the precise challenges that we are aware of and are working on. And as you revise, as we tweak this presentation and make it before different government bodies and so forth, you would revise it again so that they know up front what it is we're asking them for. Is it money? Is it political permission? Is it a regulatory blessing? Is it all those things? Are there other things? I don't know. But we need to be, I would recommend more specific in that regard. They need to know what the ask is.
I think we got to get a little bit farther on to this, and that right now we need the Corps of Engineers' input on how they intend to pursue the ownership question. Because at some point, the ask is going to be for the Country Club of Fairfield to allow for access through its property, and how the Corps of Engineers is going to get access through the property, and also answer the question of who owns the sandbar. And that's what we're trying to get at with this, and we haven't gotten to that point yet. So I agree, Don, that before this would go out to the general public, it needs context, it needs an introduction, and it needs a conclusion. But right now, I think we're trying to grapple with that question of ownership of the sandbar and access through the Country Club of Fairfield, with the Country Club of Fairfield acting as a partner in this whole project, as they have in the past with the two town efforts to excavate sand from the sandbar. These are all good.
Well, I don't want to write copy on a phone conversation like this, but I think there's a way to very succinctly say these are the issues we face, and we're working on them, or something like that. I think it can be done, and I think it makes the rest of what we're talking about so much more important and relevant.
You're right. What are the issues affecting the implementation or the completion or the solving of this problem? And they're issues that have been identified a number of years ago, and that's a very good idea. A statement.
Maybe it's a history of issues. And again, brevity is, you're talking to someone who's been told all his life, put less copy on your slides, Don. It's easy for me to say. It's hard to do, because when you're a storyteller, you have so much information to share. But sometimes less can be more, and compression and so forth is usually valued by people, especially in a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, I agree with that, and there's elements of the historical record that still have to be preserved in some place, and that's the more detailed stuff. Anyway, it's a good discussion. So I don't know how you wish to proceed, and everybody.
Well, shall we go through the slides and just?
I'll try to go through them very, very quickly. Maybe just because some of these introductory slides are from the larger presentation. And you know what's most significant about this too, in what we're talking about, is that when we're looking at the history of the navigation improvements in Southport Harbor, we're really looking at the history of federal navigation improvements in the United States, because the authorization for these improvements in Southport are some of the earliest congressional authorizations in the country. Of course, they were in New England, which means that they were early. But going back to the early 1800s, and the Corps of Engineers has given us, I think the authorization for the navigation project in Southport is the third authorization in Connecticut. The first was in Stonington Harbor, and then there was something in the Saugatuck River that we can't figure out. And then there are a handful of other ones in Maine and in Massachusetts. But it's certainly one of the first in the top 10 of federal projects authorized in the United States, which again is part of not just local history but national history.
One thing that, let me just suggest there's a possibility here before every one of us has already read this presentation and looked at it. I'd be curious to know what folks' takeaways were germane to this issue about dredging that we took from the whole presentation, because to me there were just a handful of them that are the super key points, which might get to Don's point about what are the key takeaways from all this detail that's in here. I mean, the takeaway for me, for example, is that the creation of the wall, what we call the wall today, and the beacons and going out into the harbor is a artifact of the early 19th century by the federal government working together with the state of Connecticut, and long predates by some 80 years the creation of the golf course, which is on the other side of the harbor today. And as we're thinking about dredging the harbor, which is about dredging the harbor to 100-foot width, the history that people need to understand is that that was a swamp on the other side of the golf course was for 80 years, and before the golf course existed, and that efforts had already been made by the federal government to protect the navigation of this harbor at that point, from the 1820s to the turn of the 20th century. Long before the golf course, that was there, and there was an effort to keep that wide for navigation for shipping, which was the purpose of the town's existence at that point. So key takeaways are that there's a long historic federal presence in Southport Harbor maintaining a dredge channel, and that long predates sand going over a golf course's wall that isn't really the golf course. So that's very clear from the documents that you showed there that the state of Connecticut gave both the space, the land around those three beacons and 3 rods wide from the wall and all the way out to where the jetty has been extended, was all given by the state of Connecticut in the 1820s to the federal government. And it's pretty clear to me that any further discussions that we have are going to result in it's clear that the federal government didn't give that land back to anybody. It's the federal government's land from 1828 or 9, whatever that year was, to now.
The history of the federal government and the state of Connecticut's involvement. So the beacons were authorized first, and what did I say, 1825. Right. Three beacons. And in order for the federal, and those actually are not considered, and maybe if I'm repeating what's already on the slides, but I'll do it anyway. The beacons are not considered part of the federal navigation project because they're not maintained by the Army, and they weren't. They were maintained similar to lighthouses, and so that they're the responsibility of the Coast Guard now, and whatever the agency was in the 1825. But we have the federal authorization, the federal act, and we got that from the National Archives, and that's actually online, so that was easy to find once we knew we were looking for it. And that authorized the building of the 3 beacons and money to do that. But the next thing is that the federal government needed permission and the property interests from the state of Connecticut to do that. because after the colonies became states, the states became the owner or the holder of the lands under the tidelands for the benefit of the public. So the King of England assumed that he owned everything before then, but when the states became states, they assumed that responsibility. So in order for the federal government to build those beacons, they needed a deed from the state of Connecticut to do that. So right after the Federal Act was passed, the Connecticut legislature passed a special act authorizing the governor of Connecticut to cede, C-E-D-E, by deed of cession, the lands and properties needed to build the beacons. And then soon after that, the governor at the time did that. And the special act of the legislature, we obtained that from the state library, which was very helpful. And then the handwritten action by the governor of Connecticut at the time, that is also digitized now, and that was provided by the state library. And that's in a handwritten form. So, a number of years ago, I went to the state library and they brought out the old ledger books. And I tried to decipher them and write down what I was reading. But since they've been digitized, it allows you to enlarge them and understand, see what the language is, so you're able to transcribe it properly. So with respect to the beacons, as I said, the process was the federal act, the state act authorizing the governor, and the governor's deed of cession to the federal government to build them. And they were built quite quickly, because in 1826, the Army engineers at the time conducted what we believe is the earliest survey of Southport Harbor. And the purpose of that was to design and determine navigation improvements to keep the harbor open. And those, as a result of that survey, I included sections of that survey map in the presentation in several places. As a result of that survey, the Army engineers came up with a plan for navigation improvements. And that included what they called the dike, which is the harbor wall along the east side of the harbor, and they called it a breakwater, which in effect is the jetty. And of course, the jetty was for the purpose of keeping sand, which moves along the shoreline from east to west, from going into the mouth of the harbor. And also in the presentation, and I don't know where we got this, maybe from the Pequot Library, there's an interesting artist rendition of the first jetty in Southport where the townspeople put logs, vertical logs into the, but so the plan that was developed as a result of the 1826 survey, and that survey map was published in 1827, was to build the jetty, and it was also to build the dike or the wall along the east side of the harbor. And that was to do, and again, I'm sorry to be talking just continuously here, but that was to what they call train the river, the flow of the river. So instead of dispersing out to the east into all the wetlands that are on the east side where the country club is now, the flow of the river would be more focused into the main part of the harbor. And that was the purpose of the dike. But the same process had to be followed to build the jetty and the dike as to build the beacons. And that required another special act of the legislature authorizing the governor to cede, C-E-D-E, by deed of cession, the lands and property and jurisdiction of the state to build those structures. And then the governor did that. It was interesting, it was Governor Tomlinson at the time, who was prominent in the history of Fairfield. So the jetty and the dike were built, and I forget, I'm not going through this. I'll go through this very, very quickly.
Page 11.
Yeah. The 1829 authorization is what is the congressional act that authorized the breakwater and the dike. And again, then there was the act of the special acts of the Connecticut Legislature, the governor's deed of cession, and the jetty was built, the wall was built, and interestingly, on the old survey maps, they refer to the wetlands on the east side as the sunken ground. That's the term that appears on all those old survey maps. And it's fascinating to think how they did those surveys and how they, but that's what they did. When the jetty was built, it eliminated the inner beacon, which was at the bend in the jetty, so that the middle beacon, which had already been built by the time the jetty was being constructed, that remained at the end of the jetty, and the outer beacon remained in its original position. So it makes it possible, even for someone who's not an engineer, to do an analysis of how the shoreline has changed over time, because the positions of the beacons stay the same, with the understanding that the inner beacon is the bend in the jetty. So you can compare the shoreline that existed in 1826, which shows the beacons, with the shoreline over time after the jetty was built and after the wall was built. And it's quite interesting, because the jetty captured the sand and built up the beach on the east side. But all this was in place, and then there was the authorization of the navigation, the formal navigation channels in the harbor. And I've got, without going through each of these slides, we've included some of the old Corps of Engineers charts of those channels. And the original layout of the harbor was for what they call the bifurcated channel. So it went up through the entrance up to White Rock, up a little bit more, and then it split. So one of the channels went up towards looks like the southern part of where Perry Green is now, and the other up to the area of the yacht club, and that was the bifurcated channel. So by 1896, that's what existed in the harbor, and I believe the authorized depth of the channel was 4 feet at mean low water. And I don't have any, photographs didn't exist in the 1700s and the early 1800s, but the Corps of Engineers reports describe how prior to the dredge plants or whatever they did to mechanically dredge it, the townspeople maintained a channel by using road scrapers at low tide, and they pulled them with oxen, which sounds like an interesting way, but apparently it worked. And the harbor was one of the significant ports in Connecticut. And that old newspaper article that's very interesting, Jack. So anyway, by 1896, there's the bifurcated channel, the jetty is in place, the wall is in place, and the sunken ground still exists on the east side of the wall. In 1914, there's still some additional documents that the State Library is going to provide. The Country Club of Fairfield was incorporated. And in 1914 or 15, they received permission from the federal government to dredge in the harbor and offshore between the middle and outer beacons. And they ended up dredging, according to the Corps of Engineers report, 1 million cubic yards of sediment that they used to fill the golf course. And then the golf course, fill the sunken ground to create the golf course. And the golf course opened, I think, in 1921. So the navigation improvements by the federal government precede the creation of the golf course by many years. The question now that has to be answered and also our work with the Corps of Engineers to try to figure out how to maintain that 100-foot width of the channel, which DEEP would not allow or approve back in 2004 or before that. And at the time, the Harbor Commission, we were arguing this with the DEEP. We had numerous meetings. We involved the congressmen, we involved the town's state legislators, and DEP was adamant that they did not want to maintain the full 100-foot width because that it was a coastal resource of significance, that sandbar. It was a habitat for plants and animals and, as it turned out, endangered birds. So what the DEP would allow was not dredging to restore the 100-foot width, but dredging only of 75-foot width. And they figured that 75-foot width, the setback that would result from that would not adversely undermine the plants. Even though the commission had spent resources to hire consultants who would come up with a plan for transplanting the plants, but at a certain point it was felt that it was not productive to argue anymore about this because we might not be able to do the whole harbor. So we agreed to a project that would maintain less than the 100-foot width, with the understanding that we were not changing the federal designation of the 100-foot width. We were just not dredging the full width at this time. And then we conducted additional studies to show that how much sand in the course of a year, an average course of the year, is accumulating into the channel. After Storm Sandy in 2012, the Public Works Department, and I'm going on about this too much, so just cut me off if it's too much, in coordination with the Harbor Commission, came up with a plan to excavate sand, again, to restore at that time the 75-foot width. And that was a substantial effort to do that. And to do that, we needed permission from the country club to operate equipment from their property and also bring truckloads of excavated sand along the beach over to Sasko Hill Beach, where we took it to other town beaches and dispersed it. Now what we feel is, and the Corps of Engineers feels, and there's different people now. The people at the DEP who were adamant that we couldn't do this, they're long retired, and we're still left with the issue that we could have addressed. And there are new people at the Corps of Engineers. So since that time, the Corps of Engineers has received permission in different harbors from DEP to operate its own hopper dredge, which is called the Currituck. And as I said, it sucks up the sand, puts it in the hole, and it goes to a nearshore area and splits the hole, and the sand disperses. We also worked for a good bit of time with the Bureau of Aquaculture in Connecticut to figure out where we might be able to disperse this sand, where it would have a beneficial purpose. And this is important because we can't take, it's easier to do this than to take it to one of the Long Island Sound disposal sites. And also because the sand is not contaminated, so it's the DEP would want to have it used for beneficial purposes. It was beach nourishment previously. Now our goal is, and with the Bureau of Aquaculture's goal, is to disperse this a short distance to the south of where the channel begins, over a muddy bottom, and basically harden the bottom substrate of Long Island Sound to see if that will enhance the habitat for the growth of oysters. That's our, and it's not a very far distance offshore. The other significant part of this is when the harbor was dredged in 2004, we were able to receive funds from the federal government, from the U.S. Congress to do this, but they were authorized under the congressional earmark process, which doesn't exist anymore. So as a result, the anticipated source of funding is through the state of Connecticut and through state bonded funds that would be provided by the Bond Commission at the request of the Connecticut Port Authority. And those funds would then be transferred to the Corps of Engineers to operate its own dredge. Now, the dredge itself cannot do the entire project, and we visited this dredge in operation in other harbors. So what the plan calls for now is that the Corps would also do some excavation from land, but instead of putting it in trucks to take it along the beach to other town beaches, it would put the sand directly into the hopper of the dredge, which would essentially beach itself, and then it would go offshore and disperse it. So that's our plan, and the DEP is agreeable to considering the 100-foot width, but we're going to have to figure out how to mitigate any impacts on the plants and also on the piping plover habitat. And we retained last year and the year before, we've done a number of surveys of the extent of the plants on this sandbar. And the town survey department and engineering department has helped us with this. We've hired a botanist who was acceptable to the DEP to outline where the plants are. And without going into all of the plants, the common name of the plant is panic grass, which somewhat relevant to how we used to deal with this years ago. So we still have to deal with that, but the DEP is agreeable to dealing with it. The other issue, though, is now that we're cutting in, I think this is the significant issue. Now that we're cutting into that sandbar a significant amount, we're going to be removing land that's above the mean high water line. And that means it's land that's owned by somebody. So to get permission from the DEP to do this, just like anybody who gets permission, they have to show what their ownership, what the ownership is of the land that would be affected. And if the applicant doesn't own the land, they have to have the permission of the owner. That's what we're grappling with now. That's why we put together these historical records showing the progression of the federal act, the state act, and the governor's deed of cession to help understand who owns that sandbar. And this is something that the final decision will be with the Corps of Engineers real estate department or division. But that's part of it. But anyway, it's a fascinating story. And Don, you mentioned telling stories, and you probably don't want me to talk anymore. But that's why we've done this. And the Corps of Engineers has been provided with this document. We're going to discuss it with representatives of the country club of Fairfield, and then the next steps are hopefully we'll have a plan, a dredging plan that can be provided to the state of Connecticut for approval. And once we get to that point, and we know that we have a viable project, then we can request the funds, the state bonded funds through the Connecticut Port Authority. So I look at this as like a work in progress. It's a work in progress. It's research that has relevance to solving a problem, not so much to present now to the general public.
So I may have missed some. So let me try and capture. There were 4 things that I captured that were sort of must-dos, that were dependencies if you're doing project planning, and connected to the ultimate goal to have a 100-foot dredge channel in the federal channel for the harbor. So there was a question raised about piping plovers. My understanding is that issue has now been addressed. There are no piping plovers there right now. Is that correct? Or is it an open issue or a resolved issue?
It's an open issue.
Okay, so that's one.
But the reason it's open is that when we did the dredging the last time, that we were required to post the area and to put fencing around the area to identify piping plover habitat. And we were required to do that for 7 years. And then after 7 years, if there was no nesting, we didn't have to fence it off anymore, or to monitor it. That was an expense that we incurred for the Audubon Society to monitor that. But the habitat still exists.
Okay.
So it's possible that we don't have to immediately provide monitoring, but the habitat exists, and the habitat is an area that's not sloped above a certain slope. It's flat. And so if we cut into that, we're still impacting potential habitat.
Okay.
So we have to be cognizant of that.
So there's either a resolved or not yet resolved issue around plovers,
Right.
for one. There's a botany issue around the panic grass, which we hired a botanist with a game plan to relocate potentially.
No, the botanist's job was to identify the current extent of the grass that we would survey,
right.
that we would then provide that to the Corps of Engineers. Then when the Corps of Engineers comes up with their maintenance plan, we would overlay the two and see how much of the grass would be affected.
Okay.
Then we bring the botanist back in and say, how are we going to mitigate this?
Okay, so we have a second issue besides the plover, which is around the panic grass, and that's its current
Right.
status.
Mhm.
And then there was another question, which is, I'm not sure which order to do these in. They're related to each other. One is who owns the property on which we're going to be needing to have a vehicle supporting the Currituck when we're doing the dredging, and also when we're doing dredging, whose land is affected by the dredging? They're related to each other.
Yes.
One is accessing the property
Yeah.
for purpose of dredging. The other one is literally whose property is it?
That's well put. Because, you know, when the town twice has excavated sand from the 75-foot channel, there was an agreement between the Harbor Commission and the Country Club of Fairfield for access of the town equipment, and also, you know, maintenance of the equipment on the beach side of the jetty.
Yeah.
The federal government will need a similar agreement with the country club. But since it's the federal government, we were told by the Corps of Engineers people that that's going to likely require some sort of an easement agreement, and not just a signature between the two parties.
Temporary.
But a more formal type of agreement.
Okay.
That's access of the equipment, but they don't need to move along the beach down to Sasco. They just need to have the equipment get to the sandbar so it can load up
And then get off.
Yes.
Also going.
Stay for a couple of days and then go home.
Right.
And that's the first
That's
part.
different. That's different than who owns the.
That's different than who owns the
Right.
property that they're going to
Right.
excavate.
But you have to know who owns it in order to get the easement.
For sure, that's why I say
Right, I
they're
mean,
related to
yeah,
each
yeah,
other, but
yeah.
the
It's a
presentation goes to some depth into the issue of who owns it. But
Unless they're willing to accept, unless we have an easement executed by both the state of Connecticut and the country club, both, that resolve the issue, because if you know it's one of the two, and we get both of them to grant any rights which they may have, which are undetermined, you know, that would seem to solve the problem quickly and easily.
I think the land is probably the federal government or the country club's land, right?
But
Okay.
the ownership of the sandbar, and
Better,
Pete
right.
is weighed in on this too, and Brian knows this more, I guess, than me, with Connecticut, whatever you call the law of precedent in Connecticut, that if property on the coast accretes, or sand accretes against the
Right.
waterfront owner's property, that property owner owns the accretion, just like if it's
Correct.
eroded, the state of Connecticut owns it. In this instance, if we assume, based on these historical records, that the federal government has the property interest underneath the jetty, what's accreted against that federal property, it accrues to the federal government.
Right, not the person who owns the property on the other side of Green Rod. Right.
Yes,
Right.
and that's, but we're talking about now, there are issues on the other side too, but they're not our concern. Well, our concern is the sandbar.
Right. So to Don's question at the very beginning, what are the core questions? It feels, are there any other besides those four that are sort of?
I would ask, is dispersal of the sand and material from dredging appropriately? Is that also kind of one of the key concerns we have, the appropriate dispersal or just movement of the dredged material?
I don't think it is an issue, Don, because of the Bureau of Aquaculture identified the area, and it has to be a certain depth because of the depth that the dredge needs to operate. And so that we identified that according to coordinates, and the Corps of Engineers took samples. Again, this is, you think, why can't this be done right away? But the Corps of Engineers took samples of the bottom material in that area, and they needed to somehow understand what's there, and it's related to the planning, and compare it to the characteristics of the sand that would be dredged. And they did an extensive review of that to determine it was an acceptable place for the dredge to disperse the material. We also met with the Shellfish Commission to go over this, and probably there's all new members of the Shellfish Commission now, and also a new conservation director, so That's gonna have to be brought back to their attention. But the Shellfish Commission was agreeable to what we're proposing. So there was a substantial effort to study that offshore area, to identify it according to coordinates. We hadn't thought that there's any, unless somebody objects on the Shellfish Commission now, we thought that's not an issue right now,
I think that's right. I think that's right. They're looking forward to that.
They're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So are there other things that are dependencies to be ultimate success here that weren't in those four categories of issues?
I think the funding is an issue. The money, how to do this. And if the Corps of Engineers, the Corps of Engineers is doing all of this work now as part of their operation and maintenance or something. It's not construction money that has the large part of the money. So how we get funding for this, I think, is unknown right now. But our assumption would be that this is fundable because the Connecticut Port Authority has requested and has received state-bonded funds for the Currituck to operate in other Connecticut harbors over the past several years. So we're hoping that this would be the same situation here.
So the federal government's obligation is to do the work, but not to be, the cost of doing the work is not their responsibility, is that right?
The way the Corps describes this is that they're responsible for maintaining these federal navigation projects, but that doesn't mean they have to. Whether they do or not is dependent on need and the availability of funds. And because there aren't enough funds nationwide to maintain all of the harbors that exist with commercial operations, that these recreational harbors, there's no way that they meet the cost-benefit analysis for the U.S. Congress to put these in the Corps of Engineers budget for doing them.
I see.
And that's why the state of Connecticut set up its program for providing the opportunity for state-bonded funds to do these projects that we should not expect the federal government to.
So this is under the small harbors?
No, it's a different one. It's a separate bond. It's a separate program but we can't request the funds until we either have the permit in place or we have anticipation of getting the permit.
So there are several tasks in front of this one. This is another dependency for completion, but it relies on completion of some other tasks first.
Right.
Yes, and we've been trying and the pandemic did affect this in a bit, not an excuse, but we've been trying to organize a meeting on site with the DEEP people who are completely new from 2004 and don't have the history, and the Corps of Engineers to present the plan. We've had, I think, Kim, you participated in one meeting with the Corps of Engineers to discuss their draft plan, which has slopes on the side and is related to where the plants are.
Right.
And then of course the other part of this, it's not just the sandbar, and I don't know if you can see it on any of these slides.
You can see it on page 28.
Yeah. But offshore a bit too. And forgive me, but this cartoon from 1925 about asking Uncle Sam to dredge Southport Harbor, I think it's really interesting. But
it's wonderful. I don't know where you got it, but I love it.
I had it in a file in a paper copy, and I still don't know. Somebody gave it to me, but I didn't fake it. I didn't draw it myself.
So, Jeff, you said in passing though that we need to get a permit. So there's a permit approval here that we need to get that is dependent on what, the plover issue, the botanist issue, who owns the property. So
and
all
the plan.
of those
and the Corps plan. Yeah.
And the plan from the Corps, right? So another way to sort of describe this, if we were doing something to explain to the public, would be these are the things that we have to do immediately. That will let us get to a plan that we can get approved.
Yeah.
Then we need to get the funding for it.
Right.
And then we can do that.
Right, because the big unanswered question that keeps coming up on social media that our commissioners asked last spring is, why can't the town just go in and do it? They did it in 2004.
But they didn't. they didn't do it.
Right,
They were able to restore the 75-foot width.
right,
That's what we had permission to do. So when the town worked from and we had to get a permit to do that.
right,
And that involved the significant planning for what to do about the piping clover
right,
issue, because when we're trying to restore that 75-foot width of the channel with the long-armed excavator, it did affect the side slope.
right,
And so yeah, but to be able to restore the 100-foot width of the channel, for the town to take that responsibility to do the planning and the permitting is not, in the federal channel, is not something that's reasonable to ask the town to do.
right, and I get it, but I think that
We're thinking about the PR piece of this.
the PR piece,
John's talking about, what are the questions that we need to lay out for people that we know what their goal is, they want things read.
right,
Yeah,
And
I have no issue whatsoever with the substance of this document or the history aspects. It's all rich, wonderful, and clear. Where I think my concerns are more communication kind of style and format. I want to tweak this a little bit so that we ask and answer the questions, why should you care about this and what's at stake up front, rather than presuming people get it right away.
And I think that's in response to your initial question, Don, about who the audience is.
right,
And so you're right. If this was an audience for the public who's asking what we're doing, this would be presented differently, and just like you say. But right now, it's for the Corps of Engineers
and the country club.
and the country club,
Right.
to try to resolve.
Well, I don't know. I think I might debate that. I think anyone reading this needs to know why they because we all read so much. We all have so much information to go through every week. It's helpful to be told, what's at stake here? What should I be looking for as I read this? Why should I take the time to listen or read this? I think we need to bullet that out at the outset. And then the material itself answers all that, addresses all that, or much of it. And then the unanswered questions can also be stated. I think it's helpful to a reader of any group.
That presumes that we would put this on the website for the public to see.
Right.
And then we make these adjustments that we talked about.
Right. And we have that Facebook post that Brian found for us, but somebody's saying that nobody's doing anything.
Right. I feel like we should get in front of that sooner than later.
Yeah.
Well, then I would adjust. We would adjust this to make it a presentation on because that's the priority project that was identified in the survey.
Right.
What have we done and what's taken place? And we would adjust this for that purpose.
Right. And we have the boating season that's coming up.
Right.
The harbor's filling in more. We have a commissioner who's taken pictures, who has pictures of the closing in.
For 40 years. I don't mean
to
diminish it, but when it's interesting, and I wish I got the headline someplace, but in Norwalk we worked on the dredging project for I don't know how, with a commercial aspect of the harbor, and one of the best articles was that Commission says dredging process is a relay race in the twilight zone because it took years to and the other thing that we have, I think, in our favor is that's an issue in other towns, is when the Corps goes to dredge, they want to be assured that the federal navigation project is managed in accordance with the Corps of Engineers open to all on equal terms policy. And that's something that we guaranteed when we did the harbor management plan, and that in other words, you can't have a commercial entity controlling moorings in a federal anchorage. The process for mooring allocations has to be open to all on an equal basis and not just restricted to residents, and that public facilities have to be available for non-residents. And actually is one of the conditions for the federal authorization, I forget which authorization it was, because there have been a number of subsequent federal authorizations and laws that have affected the boundaries of the navigation project in Southport. And the Harbor Commission has been the entity responsible for proposing the most recent ones. So in 1996, what had been the federal anchorage that's now occupied by the Yacht Club, at the request of the Harbor Commission, and as we agreed in the Harbor Management Plan with everyone, that mooring area was defederalized so that the Yacht Club could get its own mooring field in that area, and in exchange, the Yacht Club would provide boating services to the public. And then that main area, Perry Green to the Country Club, that area had actually been a channel going back to the days when it was the bifurcated channel and the Country Club dredged in the area between. We changed that to anchorage so boats could continue to remain moored in that area, but they had to be open to the general public. So we can attest that the harbor is managed open to all, and that's something that other towns have an issue sometimes in doing. Anyway,
our own, but many people in our harbor don't understand that. We saw a lot of answers in this, or not a lot, but several answers in the survey that said, how come we have out-of-towners here? And people don't understand that we have to allow out-of-towners to have access to moorings. So again, it's another piece of information that we probably should be letting people in the harbor know about.
I guess my thinking is, it sounds to me like we have immediate conversations about to take place with our friends at the Country Club to resolve the question as quickly as we can around property ownership and maybe some movement on getting their agreement about accessing the property by the federal government for dredging?
Yes, but I don't know that it's up to us to resolve it. It's up to us to provide information that the Corps of Engineers Real Estate Division determines that they own it.
Right.
They're gonna.
But it's in our interest to
It's our interest,
right?
And that's why we assembled. They asked if we could assemble these historical documents and provide as much information as we could to help them in their determination.
Right. So that's going on right now. And
our job is to frame the issue so that the Country Club addresses it the way we want.
Right.
And the Army Corps of Engineers.
And the Army Corps of Engineers. So it's framing it. It's framing it in a way where they can't help but get to the yes that we want them to get to.
Correct. Correct.
Right. And I guess my feeling about the PR with the public is that's important, but less important than making that progress with the Country Club at this point on this. The Country Club issue with the Corps feels like that's more urgent because that's actually going to get progress in the effort rather than just people's understanding. I think it's a secondary priority for us to deal with the PR piece. So nothing we do should jeopardize the progress in working with the Corps and the Country Club. But I do think...
In fact, I would agree with that, and I would say what we and I can be helpful here, I think, is to come up with a kind of whole secondary communication strategy, whether it's releasing a document on the website, doing certain interviews with the news media, having events or tours for different groups or people, again, in the news media that can help tell the story the way we want. All of that can be considered and done in a reasonable way, but I don't think it's the first thing that has to be done.
Right. Because we'll have more answers also by the time we're able to do that if we can make more progress in the other piece.
Right.
But it is. I think it's notable for us that we're starting to get chirping from the public. So.
It's absolutely notable, and certainly, you know, this sand management has been on our agenda since 1995, and not, in the last 6 years that I've been on the commission, we've barely been able to get meetings with the Army Corps of Engineers to move things along. So everybody's frustrated with the pace of this, and certainly any progress that we can make in terms of moving it along is really...
I told the project officer of the Corps that we were meeting today, and that we're meeting with the Country Club of Fairfield representatives next week, and that they have this, they're reviewing what we sent, and I also sent the documents to them that are referenced in here. So I'm hoping now that we can make better progress on all of this. And one of the significant things, and again, this is, you look back, where's that it's sort of not that it's our responsibility, but looking back here, 1934, nobody paid attention to this really from 1960 until when we were doing the harbor management plan, as the sand overtopped the jetty and built up.
Don, Jeff has gone to page 23 on the slide.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jeff.
That's showing there's no sand overflowing the...
Because when the harbor was dredged, it eliminated the sand that had been going over. And so we have aerial photos over the years. The last dredging before the 2004 was in 1960. And so those aerial photos also don't show a sandbar. So between 1960 and we didn't pay attention to it. So if this was really, if we were thinking about a comprehensive maintenance plan, and this is the importance, I think, of putting this into the harbor management plan, that would be approved by the DEEP, and then they would agree to all of this stuff, and we wouldn't be arguing all the time. But
we want a picture that looks like it did in 1934.
Yes, but in order to do that, it requires maintenance on the east side. As sand builds up again, the jetty was meant to provide a vertical barrier to the movement of sand.
Right.
And when it filled up,
no more barrier.
It should be moved to the east, so that there should be ongoing maintenance. When the town worked on along with the Corps in 2004, they also exposed, I don't know, it was maybe 2 feet of wall on the east side, and that filled up right away. And we had also at one point with the country club, we had put with sand fencing or snow fencing here, thinking that was going to, but that's not, the windblown sand is not what's causing the problem. We also hired an engineer to look at this. So the sand is being washed over here by high water and waves, not by wind deposited sand. And then when it gets over in here, the wind changes and pushes it up a little bit. But yeah, so how the Corps has told us that when they're planning this project as a maintenance dredging project, not as a jetty maintenance project. So if we want to think about other measures to maintain the jetty in the future, we're going to have to come up with those as well. And someone once, maybe it was Mark Foster, suggested, well, can't we raise the jetty and block more sand? Then that though is probably not realistic, because the Corps told us that this is a federal project. So before we could do that, the Congress has to pass a bill authorizing a study to see what the costs and the benefits would be of modifying the federal project, and that it's not likely that would even be passed. But anyway, those are all. I like to talk with people that think that we're not doing anything and ask them what they would do. But
well, I'm wondering if a slide that outlines the steps that have to be, you need DEP approval, you need the Corps plan, you have to deal with the habitat, you have to get the money. I mean, I'm just wondering if that...
here's where we are in the process, here's where we are, here are the steps that we're taking. Right. And what I was thinking is that you have the presentation doesn't change, it's the history of how we got where we are, and it gives you some context.
Right.
But there's on the online mooring system homepage, and maybe on the town website, there's a report every 6 months or so that's an update. Those to-dos haven't changed, it's just a question of where we are in the process.
Right.
And that we can refer people who are concerned about it to the report. And that would be our job as a commission to update it a few times a year.
Right.
I did this some time ago. This was 1960. These are old photographs that I had assembled. So 1949, you see that there's nothing there, or 1940 thereabouts. 1960, 1990, 68 is starting to build up. 1980. So there was, between 1960 and 1980 was a substantial amount. But you can see that the jetty isn't exposed. I mean, it's completely over top of the sand, so it doesn't function as a jetty.
But even an explanation as part of that it's not the wind-blown sand, it's the sand that gets blown over by the big storms, and this has created the problem. And between 1960 and whatever, nobody did anything, and this is what it looks like.
Right.
But these are the steps, whether it's 1960 or 2022, that have to be followed in order to get the dredging done.
And the other part of the area that has to be dredged is this area in here.
Yeah.
Now that's going on into the details of this stuff.
But just pointing at a point at just at the outer edge of where the jetty ends, at the middle beacon.
Now this sand here, it's not completely sand, and the Corps has tested this. So this does not look like it's suitable for going into the dispersal area. So then the question is, what do we do with this? And that means that they may have, yes, I know, that's why it's the twilight zone.
Yeah.
But that's why part of the plan may be to excavate a pit, essentially, when they're there, in the channel, and bury this stuff below the 9-foot depth, instead of taking it to the disposal site. So that could affect the cost too. But this material has to go to a different place than this.
But still, we need deep, we need Corps, the Army Corps, we need money, we need the plans, we have habitat issues.
I just feel like the steps that we just sort of worked through, enumerating them very clearly and show which things have to happen in which order and where we are on them, and then reporting on that on a regular basis could be helpful in grounding boaters who are anxious about what's going on here in reality.
Right.
Yeah, I like, looking at it as kind of must-dos for the health of Southport Harbor tomorrow, something like that. We must find a way. We don't have to answer, but we must achieve a 100-foot wide channel. We have to manage our habitat concerns. We have to form good partnerships with property owners that are involved. We have to secure budget funding. We have to win permit approval, so forth. These are kind of overarching questions that frame the whole future, this presentation and everything else that we do in this regard.
Yeah, you're right, Don. That would improve this presentation for the public, and I don't disagree with any of that.
And it's one page. It's one page. Less is more. It's not answering the question. It's asking it.
Just do it up front, you're saying.
Do it up front.
Yeah.
And then remind them at the end, these are the questions that we come back to, having looked at this history here. That we're still back with. These are the questions we're confronting.
And if you want any more information, this is the we've got this on the website, but this is the process that we have to follow, and we're engaged in all of these activities and attend our meetings or listen to the recordings or to see where we are, and we'll update you.
You're talking from a public
periodically,
Well,
I think a one page up front like that would be very good. And then there's the bookend is at the end. We continue to address these same issues. We'll continue to address these issues, and then we report on it as was said. As there's progress to report, they become the benchmarks of the project. I mean, we know them all. Now we've just spelled them out and articulated them.
I actually feel like it's the most important thing that came from the survey and of voters and people in the community. I think that maybe we even use the online mooring systems communications, Brian, and push communications to the voters and people on the waiting list using the email system that we have to push this message in front of them on a twice-a-year basis or something like that of where we stand.
There's all sorts of,
Yeah.
this story is.
That's a good idea. It's easy to do, but more important, we're going to have more voices out there who can reach out to their state, local, or federal as applicable, people as lobbyists, because the more people that squawk, the more things get done, as you know.
Yeah.
Right, and I would
That's a
say
great idea.
again, I think that the channel of using that mooring communication system that Brian looks after is great, but I think that what we share has to be user-friendly. It can't be simply a 28-page presentation. It has to be tighter than that. I'm talking less is more once again.
Yeah.
And maybe we can have a summary at the beginning, but I got to tell you, what I've learned in my few months as harbor master is folks in the harbor love the harbor and would love this presentation for the history that it gives. They are very interested in the harbor, and I think while you may have a summary at the top for the few that don't, they're not like the rest of the public. They live, breathe, and send me random emails all the time commenting. I got one on the day it snowed, for instance, last Friday.
Mm-hmm.
He said, in case you can't get down here, there's one car in the parking lot, 6 cars. He's reporting on the flora and fauna and boats for me. That's one of the local people watching it. They're very into their harbor.
Oh yeah, we love it.
Well, there was, telling stories, and I'm sorry to do this, and I won't, but, going back many years, there was a meeting with Governor Rowland, the DEP commissioner at the time, the town's state senator, about why we could not maintain or restore that 100-foot wide channel. Didn't get us anywhere, because the DEP was adamant that we couldn't do that.
He said those people are gone now.
People are all
I wonder in the conversations with how much we even need to go into that history. We just want to focus on the current goal.
And I won't tell the off-color stories about the language and the meeting in the legislative office building anyway, it's all part of it.
Well, but I think that the more information that we can provide about what we're doing, the more relevant we become to people's lives. Mm-hmm. And certainly at this point, we're perceived as a group that doesn't do much of anything.
Right. They're just looking at the dredging not happening, and that's the end of their the end of their assessment of what's going on.
I understand what you're saying now. Another interesting thing, and I'm belaboring the meeting, but after Storm Sandy, the Public Works Department had the good idea that FEMA funds would be available for paying for the town. We couldn't restore the 100-foot channel, but we could try to come up with how much sand was put into the channel as a result of Storm Sandy. And we went through a significant exercise to do this. And at the time, the fellow at the Corps of Engineers who was in charge was a friend of mine. And he said, well, wait a minute, are you sure that FEMA will pay for this? Just double check that. And we had a meeting with FEMA on the site, and they said, yes, we can pay for this. And then when it got to the point of doing the work, they refused. And they said that they couldn't pay for it because it wasn't their responsibility, it was a Corps of Engineers' responsibility, and the Corps of Engineers had post-Sandy funds. But anyway, that's another part of the story that tells the story that nothing's easy, or nothing works exactly like you think it should.
So, to go back to our agenda, we talking a little bit about next steps. So we're thinking a summary slide.
Yes, I'll do that. And
okay.
I think the other next step is and my phone is in my pocket, and I asked the Corps project manager to call me before the meeting if they had any comments about this. But I'm hoping that next week before the meeting, we'll get some additional direction or a sense of a schedule from the Corps of Engineers. But I know that their issue was the ownership of how they address that they're going to be working to cut that sandbar. They either have to assert their own ownership over it or have proof that it doesn't belong to them. And I've sent this information to them, which I hope will lead to
and the original source document.
And the original source documents.
Okay. Yeah. So we're waiting to hear from the Corps, and we're going to have a summary slide. Mm-hmm. We'll report to the full commission on Tuesday. What I'd like to do, give me your thoughts, is present this presentation to the full, give it to the commissioners.
Rather than the overall presentation of management and the formation of the harbor.
This presentation on dredging would be in addition to that. This would be something for them to read in their leisure.
Oh,
the presentation at the meeting, well, I don't know, tell me, would you think this would be, this slide would be more important to the commissioners than the history?
I like the other one because that has the history of the harbor management plan.
Right.
And that this is an element of the plan.
The other one focuses more on the multiple jurisdictional responsibilities.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
The harbor commission.
This gets to that, but that's not the purpose of this presentation.
Focuses in on it.
Okay. So, but this, in reporting to the commissioners on Tuesday, we're going to tell them obviously that we've reviewed this presentation, and I'm wondering if we think that we can have something available to the general public before our February meeting. And if that's the case, we probably want to get the okay from the commissioners to make it available to the public, which means we have to give it to them.
But it would be available to the public if we submit it to the commissioners. It becomes public information.
You need to promote it.
But promoting it is something different, yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's one thing to put a document on the website. It's another thing to get people to go look at it and understand it and read it. Those are other steps that need to be taken other than simply putting it on the website. And that needs to be thought through.
Well, do we want to wait and have another meeting and look at a summary slide that has the steps before we make it available to anybody else?
But we could make, Don's point, we could make this as a draft. You know, even though the public would have it, it would be with the understanding that we're still, if we just send it to the commission.
Right, but I can't send it, the agenda's already gone.
Oh, okay.
The materials for the meeting on Tuesday have already gone. So anything that I send to the commissioners now would be for their consideration at the next meeting, unless we ask for a motion, some kind of action on their behalf.
But why don't we, pardon me. But why don't we start with the presentation on all of the responsibilities of the Harbor Commission, and then we focus in on the priority, which will then go into more detail in
in February. Okay. All right. So
at that time, we should have that cover page that Don described. That's a few bullets about the key questions that we're facing. What is our overall objective, and what are the key steps in the process to get there, and the back end of where are we at on it, I guess.
Okay.
And then Don, I guess it feels like with that, following that, we can have a game plan about, so how would we want to think about promoting this to the public in all the ways that you talked about?
Right.
So that may be
kind of a tactical support effort.
Great.
Right. And also maybe even some tweaking of the way it's presented for the audience that we're aiming at.
And the overall presentation talks about the other projects that the Harbor Commission is actively involved with.
Right.
The lower wharf, the management of the moorings, I think it's best to start with that.
Okay.
I agree. I remember when I was beginning as a commissioner, I got really confused between these different projects because two of them involve dredging, but there are different kinds of dredging problems, and it might be better just to start with the overall one.
Okay. So February, we'll have a presentation on dredging for the commissioners, and on Tuesday night.
Yes. And the plan that we come up with for maintaining the channel, the 100-foot width, that becomes an element of the harbor management plan.
Right.
To be approved by DEP, and then that carries us into the future, so they don't argue every time that we can't do this.
Right. Excellent.
Can the harbor management plan...
And Jeff, would it be helpful if I offered just a couple of headlines or organizational outline that reflected what I've heard discussed tonight? You know, that you could then finesse into a summary upfront slide.
Yes, please do that, Tom.
Okay.
Please do so.
Great.
I can finesse it, but I'll try.
So the point.
It wouldn't be a complete. Yeah, my knowledge is so weak and superficial compared to yours. I can't pretend to do justice to the topic, but I think I can give you some
Thank you.
just kind of language buckets to organize it into that might be helpful.
Thank you. And then Doug had some interesting, while we're talking about presentations, I thought some very good ideas about the larger presentation and addressing just what you said, Don. Have less words on the slides, but have a background narration. And he was going to see if his kids who are in I forget which high school they're in.
I think they're all in college now.
They're all in college now?
Yeah.
But that they could give us some advice about how we might be able to get some help from the high school to essentially overdub, take out the larger presentation, take out the words, with just have visuals.
And have a voiceover.
To explain the slides, and that might be a more effective.
Make it more interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was a good idea. He had some other suggestions too.
Yeah.
Can I ask a basic question? In the plan update, you talked about that the key piece of it is going to be that we have a objective to maintain a 100-foot wide channel. But in our conversation today and previously, you've mentioned that in order to prevent the sand from going over the wall, we need to have a game plan to keep the sand away from getting over that wall in the first place. Do we have the authority to put in our plan something that relates to sand on private property?
I think we don't know what to do about that yet. And there have been discussions in the past about whether Public Works could do that. And then there was concern about how that would appear when the town is spending resources to work on private property. So I think we should talk about this with the country club as well.
Yeah.
We had also talked about.
Because it doesn't make sense for us to dredge to 100 feet. We saw in 30 years it fills
It's going to fill in again. Yeah.
But we now know that if after storms and on an ongoing basis, if it starts to get to the top of that jetty, we have got to move the sand away from it.
Who does that? Now, when we talked about that with the country club some years ago, they were concerned about creating a sink on the east side and how that would be an attractive nuisance, or it would be a nuisance for people using the beach, so that they were not, at least up front, agreeable to digging out an area on that east side.
I just wonder if it could be sloped rather than a trench, the way they're envisioning it. But it probably doesn't have to be that deep. It just needs to be deep enough to not have sand go over the top, which means you'd have to constantly be looking after it.
Yeah,
well,
it's ongoing maintenance.
And the strategy, it seems to me, is to say to them, otherwise we're back at you
with a dredge.
every 10 years,
right.
every
you can
15
avoid,
years.
Right, you don't need to have dredging done every 10 to 20 years.
What do you guys
the core
think?
people we talked to said, you want to do something with that? We're just planning a maintenance dredging.
Understood. But I'm wondering if in our plan it can be, I don't know what the answer is, but can we work on an answer?
Well, but maybe that's a question that we raise with the country club when we meet with them this week, so that we can, remind them that the sand gets there being washed over, not blown over, and it comes right over the wall. So, okay. Anything else?
Well, one thing
I think we're good.
Is how we can present this in this room.
Well,
do we have this room?
We have this room on Tuesday night, and Jeff and I figured out how to project the presentation. The only issue is if it's not turned on, we may be up a creek without a paddle on Tuesday.
Although they're off now until Tuesday, but I'll tell Tom thank you for setting this up for us.
Okay. Okay, everyone. So should we?
It's 4:30 on Tuesday. Is that right?
Correct. All our meetings will be at 4:30.
I'll be there.
Super, Don. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. We got a lot done. Well done, and the full commission will reconvene on Tuesday at 4:30.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to go on about all this stuff, but it's
super. Thank you, Don. Safe travels.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.